Hey there, welcome to saas.unbound podcast. I'm your host, Anna Dana, head of growth at SaaS Group. Here, like we're buying wonderful SaaS businesses to take them to the next level. And here I chat with inspiring founders and experts to get an inside scoop on how they made their business success. So today with me is Will, founder and CEO of SearchPilot, an SEO A/B testing platform and Meta CMS that enables rapid SEO changes for large websites. That's a mouthful. And, I really want to dig deeper into what exactly you're building. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I need to simplify that messaging and positioning a little.
Yes. You will have a chance to dumb it down for me, because I think the last time I could say I was good in SEO was like, I don't know, 2016. So please. But before we get to it, maybe let's start with your background.
Yeah. So, well, I've been around the SEO industry for a long time now. My co-founder and I started building websites in the late 90s, and we started our company in 2005, initially building small business websites. And then very quickly that became our clients were asking us the question, okay, how do I get more visibility, more business benefit from the website? And that was really always our focus at that time. It's hard to remember the web that long ago, but there was a lot of flash. There was a lot of people making very pretty websites that didn't necessarily deliver business value for their clients. And we'd come from the business side. And so we were really hyper focused on are these websites that we're building bringing business value? And if you remember back to that era, so this is before Facebook newsfeed, before Twitter, search was really the only game in town. And so we started helping them get found in search. Originally local search, these were small businesses in our neighborhood in Southwest London. And then as we got good at that, as we built a couple hundred small business websites, we got to the point of doing just helping sites where we hadn't built the website. So doing kind of SEO consulting, I guess. And that turned into an agency that was called Distilled. And we grew that to offices in London, New York, Seattle. We had a conference series called Search Love. And that was great. We went through a few iterations of what SEO and search really looked like over that time, over that next kind of 15 years or so. And then in 2020, just before the pandemic hit, we spun out the company that is now called SearchPilot, that is what I'm running today, and sold the agency and conferences business to a company called Brain Labs. And that was great for everyone. They wanted to expand into SEO, and particularly in North America. And we wanted to really focus in on this technology that we were building. And to simplify that message, what we're doing is we're helping really big websites test what Google is going to prefer. And so that's bringing a kind of more scientific, more data-led approach, which is really necessary in an era where Google is increasingly impenetrable. They don't even know why a certain website is outperforming another website. And so we're helping folks cut through that problem.
Okay, that's pretty awesome. And I feel like a lot of people need your help and want to simplify it a little bit, because like you said, it's just a black box. It's I don't even go there anymore. Like, I'm so thankful that we have people at SaaS Group that deal with that, and for me, they're real magicians. I'm going to ask you, of course, about this is how you spun out of the bigger venture and only into SaaS, and why that happened. But just I think maybe even yesterday, the day before yesterday, I saw another YouTube video that was that had a headline, SEO is dead. And I mean, frankly, I've been seeing it die several times over the last couple of years. And how do you feel about that? How what's actually going on? Like, are there like such dramatic changes that some think it's not even worth going there anymore, or what's going on?
It probably won't surprise you to hear that I don't think SEO is dead, and that I think that's probably overhyped. And yeah, as you say, not the first time we've heard that story. I think it's been dying since before it was before it existed, apparently. So I would say the eras that I've been involved with, so it goes all the way back to pre-Google. I think our very first websites that we built were, it was Alta Vista, Ask Jeeves, Hotbot, Excite are the sites that I remember from the mid to late 90s. Then obviously the early era of Google, I remember recommending Google to people before they'd heard of it, when just the geeks were using it. And then I would say probably that first era, 2005 to say 2009, was in one sense, a golden era of SEO, in the sense that it was a lot easier in certain ways, right? If you just took a database that had not previously existed on the internet and put that database on the internet, Google was desperate to index new content, surface that content, and display it in search results. And the big winners of that era were people who took things like real estate and put it on the web, right? That's where Zillow in the US, or Find a Property, I think was probably that era in the UK. So you could literally say, here we have a page on our website for every zip code, every street name, every apartment address, and Google would be like, great, give me 100 million of them, and would rank a lot of that stuff. Out of that era came the challenge that a lot of it was terrible. These were not useful pages. They were just boilerplate or kind of repetitive pages. And so from that era came the quality focus era, 09 to say 2014, putting approximate kind of timelines on it, when we saw updates like Panda, Penguin, those kinds of things coming out of Google. And it became a lot harder to cross the quality threshold that you needed to do well. And that was the death of a certain kind of tactic. And probably two kinds of tactics died in that era. One was low quality link building, and one was just kind of churning out any old stuff, content, database content, and putting it on the web. There was the big shift to mobile, which everybody thought was, well, people thought was going to kill Facebook, never mind Google, but turned out to just be a great thing for both. The interesting stuff we're in at the moment, I think, is the rise of AI and machine learning. And actually there's a couple of phases. So Google's been using it in their core algorithm now for some time. And that's part of what's led to it being this increasingly impenetrable algorithm. It's not a human understandable ordering anymore in a way that it maybe was in 2005. And that's kind of the beginning of that era. And then we're actually, I would say, into the next phase of that, which is the rise of the large language models. And we see it with competitors like ChatGPT, which I think you have to see as a competitor to Google, but you also see it as something that Google is using in their own product with AI overviews and similar kinds of features. And as I say, I've been around a while now. My tendency is to see these things as an evolution rather than a revolution. I think that what we're going to see actually is that a lot of this technology is, in the language of Clayton Christensen, a sustaining innovation, in the sense that it is a step change in how things work, but it benefits the incumbent, that Google is going to do really well out of this era. And that isn't to say that every website is going to do well out of it. And it's certainly not to say there aren't headwinds and challenges. And I think there certainly are issues around both what it means for Google search results, but also what it means for the web, when it's super cheap to create content that's indistinguishable from human written content. And it's very hard to figure out how good that content is. It's in that uncanny valley where you can't tell it's bad, but it might still be bad. And maybe we eventually get to it's good, but who knows? There's still going to be a lot of bad content out there. And so there's a lot of challenges, a lot of headwinds for a lot of websites and for Google. But I think ultimately it'd be good for Google. And I think if Google is going to survive and thrive, which I predict it will, then it's going to continue sending a ton of traffic out to the open web. And the biggest thing that we see is, we work with some of the largest websites in the world, and organic search, Google organic search, is still by far their biggest channel, their biggest digital channel that exists, certainly the biggest channel for acquisition of new customers. And yet, and this is the reason why SearchPilot exists, it is typically their least well understood channel. They understand it less well than paid search, paid social, other kind of digital channels.
Yeah, and I agree with you with the, ChatGPT being the competitor of Google. But yeah, I remember last year, everyone started saying like, "Oh, I use ChatGPT instead of Google now,"
Mhm.
and I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." And I tried it, and I was like, "Oh, that's shit," and I went back to Google. But now,
Yes.
I gave it another try this year. Like, I started doing it a couple months ago, and it just got so much better. It's still, it's still not there. I still believe Google is so much better, especially if you need like some deep kind of research and actually like check your sources and stuff. But it just got so much better. It's ridiculous, and very fascinating what they're doing.
Yeah, 100%. And I think for me, the most exciting thing, both as a user and as someone in this space, is I think probably for the first time since the rise of Amazon in the late 2000s, we've got a competitor holding Google's feet to the fire.
Hmm.
And people talk about Bing as a competitor to Google, and they're not. They're a stalking horse at best. Amazon was a threat, and we saw
Hmm.
that with Google all pivoting into product search and shopping search and those kinds of things. And I think that was a real is still probably one of their biggest challenges is that you may go direct to certain kind of retailers or websites when you want to buy things. If they can aggregate that demand sufficiently, then Google kind of misses out in certain ways. The rise of the large language model and ChatGPT and the like is the next thing that is forcing Google to innovate. And
Yeah.
I think they stagnate with that innovation. So I think it's exciting. I personally find just that they're pretty complementary. I use both a lot,
Hmm.
and my my prediction is kind of twofold. One is that even though ChatGPT is, I think, the fastest adopted product ever in history, fastest to 100 million users, all those kinds of things, uh, we still have to remember the extreme scale of Google. So even if that continues, Google has this huge, huge position. But actually, I think I'm even more bullish for Google than that, which is to say, what I think we're going to see is more that it is incremental on top of search. There's a kind of core search job to be done that Google is still extremely good at. And that there are new things that computers can do that they couldn't do before. And that's largely in addition to being extremely good at search, which maybe not a solved problem, but certainly an extremely well solved problem. And for me, this is resonant again for a past era of my career. I remember I skipped over it before, but one of the other times that SEO was dead was the rise of social in the late 2000s, and launch of Facebook newsfeed, Twitter, these kinds of things. There was a lot of angst, and this is why they launched Google Plus, if you remember that. There was a lot of angst that maybe people would stop searching the web and would instead ask questions of their social network. So instead of searching best steak restaurant in London, I would tweet or Facebook post, "Hey guys, where should I go to eat in London?" And of course, people did that. People do that still. But if you look at those growth charts, like Google continued growing through that time, and there was an additional kind of cohort. It looks like a cohort graph, looks like a great net revenue retention expansion graph, where on top of all of Google's growth, there was this additional thing of social. And that's my best guess of what's going to happen with the large language model chat interface type things, because chat isn't the right interface for everything you might want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to ask a question that just popped into my mind, and maybe it's completely stupid, and like tell me about it if you think it is, or if it's completely irrelevant, I'll edit it out or something. But is there some kind of way to optimize for things like ChatGPT?
It's not a stupid question at all. I'm sure there are boardrooms around the world asking themselves that question. For the most part, they're distracting themselves right now. Right? If the CMO of I won't pick on a brand of a major brand is spending time saying to their SVP of digital, I want to see a point of view on how we perform better in ChatGPT. I'm not super bullish on that. I think that there are ways, and it will be a thing, but at the moment, that's not going to drive return on investment compared to investing in core channels and brand. And there's been a lot of Nike was in the news around that a lot recently about their investment in direct response at the expense of brand. So I don't think people should be spending a ton of time on it yet. It clearly is going to be a thing, and it also clearly is possible. I think they're probably influenced in much the same way that large crowds of people are, right? It's all about forms of digital PR for appearing in all those kind of right places, what people say about you. But it's also influenced in ways that Google search is. And the signals won't be exactly the same. Not that we know what they are for Google anyway. But one of the things that we have on our someday maybe roadmap at SearchPilot, and as I say, we're staying pretty focused right now on regular organic search, but we are pretty aware that our technology would repurpose pretty well to a world where how you perform in large language model recommendations was important. And as long as we can measure that signal somehow, which I anticipate we would be able to do directly or indirectly, then you could optimize for it through a similar experimentation process of saying, as we refine what we say about ourselves, how does that affect what shows up in those large language models? Bearing in mind that just like SEO, it's also going to be a factor of what people say about you. So there's going to be a place for brand and PR work as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That's super interesting. It's just, I don't know, somehow you were talking about Google, and I thought, okay, well, since all the language models are kind of a substitute, or just an additional tool for us to search for stuff, like should we think about that too? But anyway, thank you so much. It was a great kind of course, crash course into SEO. So I really appreciate that. But back to the company, when I was reading, researching about you and the company, I thought, well, that's a very interesting story, like how you got out of this service and event part and just focused on SaaS. Because, well, I hear this stories a lot here, like when founders just ditch the service, go full on into SaaS. Some do it several times, some go back eventually. But yeah, what was your clue that maybe this is something you should focus on?
It's a great question. There's a lot of different ways you can tell a story, forwards, backwards, and with different degrees of hindsight. I think the forwards version, so what we saw at the time as we were working through it, was what we did first was form an R&D team within the agency that was focused on interesting uses of technology that would benefit the company. And of course, at the time, the company was the agency, was the services business. And so the first things that we were working on were things that would make the agency more effective. And I think that's also a very common story. You see a lot about technology enabled or technology driven services business activity. And we had some moderate successes in those directions, but we were more excited by the product that would eventually become SearchPilot. And that kind of came out of some hack days and some brainstorming and some blue sky thinking. Some of it was a technology whose time had come. We'd had some of these ideas well over a decade earlier, but at a time when AWS didn't exist, some of the Google wasn't necessarily real time enough. So the kind of crawling, re-indexing, re-ranking wasn't quick enough necessarily to have that feedback cycle that you need to run those kind of experiments. And so, yeah, it was an idea where we felt the time had come. And we initially, again, thought that actually it would be quite likely to all be one business, that the clients of the agency would be customers of the tool and vice versa. And there would be a kind of nice relationship there. It actually turned out that the target market wasn't as similar as we'd initially expected. The agency business had a lot of clients and a lot of opportunity in areas that weren't great fits for the software. So whether that's B2B SaaS, finance, those kinds of areas where you have actually websites that are not always that huge. They're hugely valuable, but they aren't necessarily tons of pages. So if you think about a classic financial services business or something like that, or B2B SaaS business, hundreds, maybe thousands of pages, and the top 10 or 15 are worth an incredible amount to that business. But it's not always a long tail play. There are some notable exceptions, people like Zapier, but in general, I think that's probably true. And that was an area where we did a lot of work as an agency. What we increasingly realized was that the target market for SearchPilot was huge websites, and typically huge B2C websites. So e-commerce, travel, also real estate, jobs, some other areas like that. But really that kind of e-commerce, retail, and travel are the core. And so those companies typically have large, capable, smart in-house SEO teams, and actually engage with agencies only in a more project-based or kind of in a more limited way. So in both directions, the agency target market wasn't exactly the software target market, and the software target market wasn't exactly the agency target market. Just as we were realizing that, we had the opportunity that kind of came along to sell the agency business. And at first we couldn't, I mean, the initial inquiry was about acquiring the whole thing. At first we couldn't figure out a way to make it work. And actually it was kind of, there's always bits of serendipity through these stories, but it was beneficial that I knew the founder of Brain Labs. This was why the deal kind of came up in the first place. He'd actually spoken at our conference years earlier. So that was a nice ROI on running a conferences business. And also, usefully, I knew their new investors. So they had this private equity backer who I knew separately because I'd spoken at their portfolio conference. So another speaking connection. And it was actually that second connection that made us go back and have another look at this. So when the founder and I sat down, and we couldn't quite figure out how to make the deal work because of the dynamics of this, kind of incubated technology business within the agency. And luckily, the investor was confident this was the right move of putting these two businesses together, or two agencies together, I should say. And he kind of did a literally a back of an envelope. Here's how the finances work. Here's how you do this. You spin this bit out. You move this money, funds this, whatever. And that back of the envelope deal, which I think we were having that conversation in maybe July 2019. Literally, that back of the envelope deal. I mean, there was a lot of legal expenses in the meantime, but that deal turned into heads of terms, turned into an exclusive term sheet, turned into the deal we actually did in January 2020. And that journey was, so there was a lot of serendipity in that process, but ultimately it was what both bits wanted. So Brain Labs was private equity backed, focused on being an agency, wanted the wanted EBIT, wanted cash flow, and we as founders were ready for the next phase of the journey. 15 years in, we were ready to do the SaaS thing, and that meant focus on the high performing technology business, and we were less focused on margin and cash flow at that point, though we had to be sustainable, and we bootstrapped from there. So we're we were kind of cash flow positive and sustainable before it was cool, but that journey kind of worked out for what everybody wanted to do.
That's super interesting. Yeah, and I also hear that bit about the customers of the service not being the customers of the SaaS product very often, and how often when they start kind of building a SaaS into the service and telling the customers that, okay, we're ditching this service and this is what you will have to kind of get into, and the product is what eventually we're going to become. People still want the service. People still come to you for the service, and they expect you to perform that service for them, and how difficult to again to spin out of this. And I wanted to ask about your kind of personal journey out of this kind of back and forth service plus SaaS situation. Like, how did it affect you, and was there like a dramatic mindset shift, or you were like, you know what, like you said, 15 years in, I'm kind of ready for the new one?
It's probably a bit of all of those things. I'm definitely ready for it. I think there have been some moments of dramatic mindset shift, but probably more it's been a gradual process of learning, personal development, and growth to say, what is different? And there were some things that I knew were going to be different, and sure enough, they are. There are some things that I suspected, but were even more true than I could have expected. And there were some kind of almost surprising left field things, I think, in that journey. We've tried to really lean into this concept of founder market fit, in the sense that before we spun out, we sat down and had a conversation with the team that was going to spin out. So there were a group of people who came across from the agency, particularly the senior team. And many of us had worked together for what have now worked together for well over a decade. We wanted to place this bet on ourselves because we felt like we were as well positioned as anyone. If this market was going to exist, it's kind of category creation. It's a new thing. But if it was going to exist, we were as good a team, we thought, as anyone to attack it. And I think it's true at a company, it's true of a person. Your greatest strength is also where your greatest weaknesses lie. We have a leadership team that is all steeped in SEO expertise. We've all been SEO consultants. The SearchPilot COO and CTO both joined as analysts in the agency days. And so we deeply know the service side. That's been good for us in some ways. It's led to us being quite confident, I think, in how we pitch the product, and in particular in pricing and some of those kind of areas. The challenge, of course, is that we're always tempted by consulting, and we have to build the scalable thing. But I think the biggest surprises have actually been about the business model. SaaS is this beautiful business model of recurring, growing revenue. It's got great cash flow profiles. It's possible to build extremely big, profitable businesses doing it. It's also extremely hard to do enterprise sales, to sell expensive SaaS, right? To sell SaaS at price points that it needs to be at to justify the wrapper and the services, because we do have professional services, and the kind of the size of customer that we're working with needs that and demands that. And so I think everything always has taken longer in the product and software side than we could have expected. And that it's somebody or other's rule, isn't it? But even when we take into account the fact that we know it's going to take longer than we expect, it still takes longer than that. But that compounding effect is there, and there's something magical about that. And I think the truly recurring revenue is something that agencies dream of and aspire to and work towards. And even when we had recurring revenue, as in we had clients signed up who paid us every month, it was always brittle. It was always on the edge of cancellation. There was no sense that you were building really an asset. It was a lot of reselling and staying in the business in those kinds of ways. And truly recurring revenue is kind of magical. If you can, obviously, you have to have the recurring value to back that up. And probably the single most surprising thing actually in the move was on the cash flow side. And as I say, we're bootstrapped. We got ourselves back to bootstrapped. So we recently managed to buy out. There was a small stake that we'd sold during the spin out process to the acquirer of the agency. It was the best way to capitalize the new startup. It wasn't particularly strategically aligned for them. They're not investors. They're an operating business, and we weren't desperate to have investors particularly. And so it was great for both sides that a couple of years later we were able to buy them out. So we're what we call back to bootstrapped. We bought them out, and SearchPilot is independent again, and cash flow therefore is supremely important. I mean, it's important to every business, but it's supremely important to a bootstrapped startup that is trying to compete in a space where many SaaS businesses operate cash flow negative for a long time. But probably the biggest surprise was the ability to have annual contracts and have most of them prepay. That's just standard in software. And it's not that surprising rationally. I remember as a few £1 million agency, we would spend tens of thousands on certain pieces of software in advance for the year. So, multi-billion-dollar companies spending hundreds of thousands in advance is not that wild. Intellectually, I know that. And yet the fact that in 15 years of running an agency, I think we got somebody to prepay for a quarter once, certainly never for a year. And now 80% of our customers are on annual contracts, most of whom prepay annually, or longer, actually, some are on multi-year contracts, is kind of magical, because what that means is that our customers are our investors, essentially. They're the ones who are betting on our success and causing that success. And it just aligns everyone into that angle. And it's what allows us actually to invest in growth, even though we have this necessity to be sustainable. And so our cash flow is sustainable, partly because as we grow, we get to collect next year's ARR this year in cash, which is kind of a superpower.
Pretty awesome. Yeah. I can totally see that. That's a great story. Okay. I didn't know that you're back to Bootstrap, and this is again something that I've heard a few times this year from founders on the podcast going back to Bootstrap, and uh, someone says that it's not possible. Like once you go VC backed, you cannot come back. That's a new SaaS story. But just just the mindset change, and the fact that you don't have the money to spend on pretty much anything you want. But there are quite a few stories where it's been done and very successfully, and I would love to talk more about this. But there is another thing that I desperately want to ask you, and just coming back to AI and just drilling that topic, just because again, something that I see very often on LinkedIn mostly is those stories where again, SEO as we know it is dead. And here is this AI tool that I built, and it does all my SEO. And look at the results. Like in 6 months, they have this like millions of people and millions in revenue. And this is my strategy, and it works, whatever you say. So, you know, I'm pretty sure you see those too. They are pretty loud. So, what do you think about those? Like, how sustainable is it? How in a way, how true is this?
I mean, I don't know the truth of any individual story, but
Sure.
I certainly can believe that there are people making bank that way. There has, broadly speaking, always been two big, totally different approaches, both called SEO, that really are totally different things. And they are, can I get a short-term hit? Can I get a win right now that is profitable in the moment versus the sustainable, I'm building a business, I'm building a brand, I'm going to do this for the enterprise, and I'm going to do this to build brand value over years and decades. And they both have always existed, and both are fine. There's a place for each one. You can argue about the relative different merits of different situations, but I think in most cases, aside from some, there are certainly illegal things that you can do, or immoral things that you can do. Setting those to one side, for the most part, it's horses for courses. What's your objective? What are you doing here? What game are you playing? And the short term thing has always existed. There were people who are doing, round robin link networks. I'm not going to go into all the details. There are plenty of tactics that worked in 2004 and made some people a lot of money. And they were not tactics that we could use when we were consulting for large brands, because what they were doing was they were churning and burning, right? A domain would win for a month and then it would disappear, explode, gone. And you have to start again. And that's fine. That's a perfectly legitimate thing. There's kind of a bit of a game of cat and mouse, bit of fun. And I know people who made tons of money that way. And in the early days, it would have been ranking for big money keywords. There was a big affiliate era. There was, there's been tons of those kinds of made for AdSense type plays over the years. I think a lot of what you're talking about is the evolution of that. And I would not expect them to be sustainable. And I think you can see that from kind of basic game theory. If it's that easy, it can't be that sustainable, because my favorite way of describing SEO in the early years, which I think actually continues, is people used to call it competitive webmastering. And I've always liked that. I'm pretty competitive. I like playing sport. I like whatever. I like that idea that you're competing with other webmasters. But fundamentally, a lot of that kind of churn and burn type stuff is fundamentally quite zero sum. You're not necessarily expanding the pie, you're just taking more of the pie for yourself. And in a zero sum game cannot be both sustainable and easy, because what happens when the next person comes along and does the same thing that you just did? If the pie hasn't got any bigger, then how does that work exactly? There's no kind of infinite money machine buried in there. Conversely, my view is that the other kind of SEO, and it's weird, it's kind of unfortunate that they're called the same thing, but the kind of work that we do to expand the opportunities in the organic search channel for major brands, they, their entire business online is wrapped up in the power, strength, and reputation of their domain. They can't afford to just throw that domain away and start again because they've blown it up. And so they have to do the sustainable stuff. which means you can't embarrass Google. That's kind of one of the foundational um, tenets, I think, of that form of SEO. Is you could, in the first game you can embarrass Google and you make money until they realize, get embarrassed, and slap you down. If you're playing the sustainable game, you can't afford to embarrass Google, and you're playing essentially a much more collaborative, much less zero sum game. You're playing a game where you're trying to do things that are good for you, good for the user, good for Google, and it's kind of we start edging into like capitalist type arguments, but the power of the market basically means that pie expands. If the right websites rank for more, get more visibility for the things that they are genuinely better than other people in the market at doing, then you generate consumer surplus. And sure, you get some of that, Google gets some of that, but ultimately the consumer gets the majority of that. And the better that set of search results gets, the more the consumer wins. The more the consumer wins, the more they spend. The more they spend, the bigger the economy. The bigger the economy, the more money there is flowing around for the whole thing. I'm not going to like evangelize capitalism. Hopefully, a lot of folks are kind of sold on that idea. But the crucial thing is that the pie is growing, and that form of SEO is not zero sum, because it's not just about ranking better at someone else's expense. It's about ranking better where you deserve to, and then you get more clicks than there even were available to the worst result. It's about expanding that keyword universe, so you rank for more things. There's all these stats thrown around from 15 to 20, maybe even 25% of all queries that Google sees are brand new. They have never been seen before in Google's 20 whatever year history. And that is not zero sum. That's expanding. That's a universe that's expanding out from a big bang. And so that game, by the fact that it's not zero sum, that's what makes it sustainable. There's room for lots of winners and lots of continuing to win. So yeah, I guess the short answer is those things. Some of them might be nonsense. Some people might be making things up, but I'm
Yeah,
sure that some of those stories are true. That doesn't mean that they're sustainable, and it certainly doesn't mean they're the right tactics in the enterprise. But no doubt, some people are making bank, and that's a game too.
sure. Yeah, I mean, it's just, again, out of curiosity, because we see those things and we discuss them with, colleagues and then other SEO experts, and sometimes it's just, it's this. It was the same story with, ChatGPT is going to eliminate all the marketers or like all the content creators and stuff like that. And like, you wonder, like, what if I just need to throw things out and like put it into ChatGPT? It will do my SEO strategy. Anyway, let's go back to like, going back to sustainability, bootstrapping. Why? And why you thought that this is the moment to do this? How you were doing this, and was there any, again, mindset shift in a way, that you no longer have this backing, or you know however it worked for you before, when you still had investors? So yeah, maybe you can walk me through this.
Yeah, I mean, I should say the investors we had weren't VC investors. It was the agency that had acquired our agency, who invested in our startup, which meant it was a slightly different game, different pressure. I don't know. I can't speak to how easy it would be to buy out early VC investors. I think that's probably much harder, because to get the growth that you need to afford to buy them out would ramp up the value so much that they wouldn't want to get out. And like they are professional investors. That's the game they're in. In our case, there was this opportunity because that wasn't the game they wanted to be in. And so there was a valuation insect of the Venn diagram, where there was a valuation that we could afford to buy them out at, and they were happy to be bought out at that level, mainly because they didn't fundamentally want to be professional investors. Setting that to one side, why now? Why do we think it's a good idea? I think my view on investment is that it is necessary for certain kinds of business. Right? There's definitely some kinds of business that you couldn't bootstrap, and actually, I think SaaS is probably in that category. If you don't have you need some way of getting over that long initial bit of time when you've got no revenue, but you are building. And we were lucky enough to fund that through the agency. So that was kind of it. We started bootstrapping the software product by starting an agency 10 years earlier, which is a pretty slow game. I'm not going to lie. My view is that I would definitely recommend agencies as first businesses. Doing a bit of consulting, freelancing, turning it into a small agency is a great way to learn the ropes, to learn business, to learn sales, crucially, to learn client management, account management, and your trade and your craft. All crucially, you can bootstrap an agency from zero. My co-founder and I literally started on day one with a laptop each and nothing. And you can you literally just have to have saved up enough to eat and keep a roof over your head until you close your first client, and then they pay you some money, and then you've got some money. So the agencies are great first businesses in that respect, but they're incredibly hard medium to long term businesses for all the reasons that I kind of talked about, that you're essentially having to catch and kill all that revenue every year, and even the recurring revenue is not quite as recurring as you might like to hope or believe. So we were lucky to be able to get over that kind of seed stage with what would become SearchPilot by funding it through the agency. From that point onwards, once it gets to the point of past the seed stage, so you've got some customers, you've got some revenue, then it's a much more philosophical choice. And I think it's about deciding what life you want to live, fundamentally, what your goals are, what are you shooting for. There's a place for that whole spectrum. And my biggest advice to anybody who's on that early path is just know what game you're playing and decide what game you want to play, and then play that game. Remember, if you want to raise VC money, a 3x exit is a failure for your investors. They are not happy. That's not sufficient for them. And you're playing the 100x game, and you're playing the game of, are you the 1 in 1,000? Probably worse odds even than that, but certainly you're playing that game, and you're trying to play a game that has an extreme variance of the gap between best and worst outcomes. We got too far to go back and play that game, right? So by the time we'd spun out, we were over $1 million in ARR. We had a team. We didn't want to go back to saying we're now 1 in 1,000 chance of success. Like, we cleared that first hurdle, and we wanted to say, no, the game we want to play is a much, much higher likelihood of a lot of success, and accept the fact that probably means we're not going to get to $1 billion ARR, right? Like, that is, who never say never, who knows what we can achieve eventually, but certainly that's not any kind of short term. That's not what our shareholders, including me, including founders, including the team, that's not what we need to achieve success. And I think the crucial thing is realizing that, like, what does ambition mean to you? If ambition means to you that you have to shoot for the very, very, very top with the minuscule chance of success and much larger chance of complete failure, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. That's definitely a kind of ambition. For me, the kind of ambition that I had and that the team has was much more about defining where we're at, and a mission that we wanted to achieve, that we believe we can achieve. A mission that we're all, I think we have a very, very high likelihood of achieving what we want to achieve over the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. And we then want to do that to the best of our ability, as fast as possible, as successfully as possible. But that's what it kind of means to me. And then it's just about decisions. Everything falls out from there. And there's certainly things that I think have nudged us along the way. So we launched into the teeth of COVID, right? So we spun out in January 2020 and went through a horrible 6 months, and then a really good time that, a lot of digital businesses, I think, saw that era when COVID was still a thing, but the economy, particularly the digital economy, was taking back off rapidly, and we saw that kind of tick-shaped recovery. But then, of course, you run into the next set of headwinds around inflation and war in Ukraine and so forth, that meant that investment clamped. I mean, not investment in the VC sense, investment in the sense of people buying software suddenly slowed down, and there's all kinds of macro headwinds. And I think that's what I was talking about earlier when I talked about we were cash flow positive and sustainable before it was cool, because that was the time when suddenly it became cool to be sustainable and not to be default dead and need that next round. And I think some of that assumption that just because you raised a seed, you can raise a Series A, just because you raised a Series A, you can raise a Series B, etc. Some of that assumption was a zero interest rate phenomenon, right? That was a thing that was true in the late 20 teens into 2021, and it's not true today. Probably wasn't true historically either, pre-global financial crisis. And I think it was that was probably a bit of an aberration of a time. And I mean, again, different games you can play. Fair play to the folks who raised at insane valuations and took huge amounts of secondary in businesses that had no revenue yet, or essentially no revenue yet. And there are probably businesses that are no bigger than SearchPilot is today, who raised at hundreds of millions, if not billions, in valuation and took life-changing amounts of money off the table in secondary. And amazing, well done. Some of those businesses no longer exist, and so we're just playing a different game.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you. I think that's a very valid question to ask yourself, and this is something that we also want like to ask the founders who are selling to us or who are coming with
Mm-hmm.
an exit in mind. Like, what's the game that you initially wanted to play, and that kind of gives us a bit of an understanding of the mindset that we're working with. So that's
I should
yeah,
also just one point that
yeah.
ties into that. I think the fact that we can be extremely clear about that game that we're
Mm,
playing, that we're sustainable and ambitious, and we plan to hit these big growth targets in a sustainable way, that in a high confidence way, and in a way where we're in control of our own destiny. I also happen to think that is the best thing for our customers, because we're an important part of their infrastructure, and we're hopefully delivering huge value for them. And as I said earlier, some of them are making multi-year bets that we're the right solution for them. And I think it's way better for them to do that with a business that's taking the bets we are, where we have an extremely high likelihood of existing in 5 or 10 years' time, compared to, as I say, some of those folks who took the huge round, took the secondary, blew up. What about the businesses that actually relied on that service? And that's not, I don't sit in judgment of that, but just that strategically, I happen to think that our customers are better served by a company like ours.
Yeah, that's a fair point. All right. Well, honestly, while you were talking, I got a ton more questions, but we're running out of time, and I just have a couple left for you then. And they're kind of the usual here. I'm just going to add like one more, because I think there's maybe something that I missed. While I was doing my research. But what do you think is the most kind of fascinating thing about what you've built about SearchPilot?
Well, I mean, I'm a massive geek, so there are definitely some interesting things that we've learned about how Google works, how the web works. I mean, actually, some of the most interesting stuff to me is when you see under the hood and you see behind the scenes of how some of these big websites work, and the way that some of the most successful sites on the internet are at this point, 20, 25, even older, years old. And they're held together by sticky tape and string in many cases. It's a wonder that the internet works as well as it does. But that's me kind of geeking out on the technology side. I think, yeah, in terms of our core mission, I think probably it's been very, very interesting to see that the win rate of a great experimentation program in SEO is quite similar to the win rate in a great experimentation program in other areas, whether it's product, user experience, conversion rate experimentation. So 10 to 20% win rate is what we see. There's a great paper about this from Bing, actually, not as a search engine, just as a product team, talking about how it's hard to find things that are a good idea, that move the needle, that make you more money than they cost to do. And so, yeah, I think probably on a mission sense, that's been some of the most interesting things that we've been able to do. There've definitely been some surprising tactical SEO results. This maybe isn't the podcast for diving into those, but there's some of that stuff on our website if people are interested. And then I think, as far as, I mean, obviously being a SaaS focused audience, I think as I mentioned earlier, probably just some of the business dynamics that I knew intellectually were true, but seeing the power of the compounding, the recurring revenue, and the annual prepayments in particular, if you're dealing with the enterprise, has been eye-opening, tempered by the fact that, as I said, everything's slow and sales cycles take a lot longer than you think.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. That's true. Lots of things are changing. Like it's been fascinating couple of years. Like I really enjoyed just seeing all the changes. And I mean, in a way, of course, some of them make you cry, but it's still fascinating.
You know you're
Um,
alive.
yes, you come out alive. Anyway, so what so far, and it can be, even taking the agency years as well as the SaaS years. Um, what's been for you as a founder the biggest win and the biggest failure?
I think I would say is the biggest uh, two bits of biggest win, probably most related to to this podcast, is the I feel incredibly lucky to have got to this stage of company growth bootstrapped. Yeah, as I was saying earlier, the fact that we were able to get the scale we needed to get to exit velocity while still part of the agency, and then pull off that spin out and sale with quite good timing and through probably I don't think we get to take credit for closing that deal on the 31st of January 2020, but I'm glad we did. I think that's the biggest win, and I think when we look back on it, that will be ultimately the biggest commercial success, is the fact that we did manage to bootstrap a genuine growth SaaS business, and that's rare and hard, I think. So that's probably the biggest win on that sense. I think in terms of what I look back on at having got the most personal satisfaction from, and this spans the eras, this spans SearchPilot and Distilled, is we built a brand that is bigger than, in a sense, we deserve to. I think we were better known than we were than our size would have led you to guess. And what that enabled us to do was be an amazing place for people to work at certain stages in their career. And I think when I look back on what we're ultimately most proud of over decades, it's those folks who joined us along the way, some of whom are still with us decades later, some of whom went on to do other amazing things. And I mean, it's a bit of a cliche, but it comes back to the people. And we actually ended up elevating that. That was in our core values in Distilled, but actually we elevated it all the way up to the purpose of SearchPilot, so that we define the purpose of SearchPilot as achieving both the mission and the vision, which is a combination of proving the value of SEO for the world's biggest websites and building a great place to work, proving that software businesses like SearchPilot can be incredible
Yeah.
places to work. And
One thing I do, just to throw it out there, before every podcast, is I do research all the reviews about the company, from the team, because, well, we're pretty serious about culture and who you're working with and how happy your teams are, and I did that for you, obviously. So I can, yeah, people are very happy with you guys.
So I was going to say, actually, you asked about wins and losses, or successes and failures. On the failure side, that's the same area. Whenever we've let people down in those areas, are the biggest failures of my career. And I think they're not necessarily the biggest financial failures. So we joked that when you're just starting out, you make a failure, you make a mistake that costs you £100. You order from the wrong supplier or something, and at some point you're lucky enough to make £1,000 mistake. I think our first £1,000 mistake was probably something around AdWords, running some ads accidentally that we shouldn't have done, or sending traffic to a 404 page or something. And then if you're lucky enough, you make a £10,000 mistake, and we definitely made some of those around our conferences. I remember maybe even our first £100,000 mistake was we actually had to cancel a conference. Obviously we had to in COVID, but this is way before that, where we tried to run a conference on the West Coast in the Bay Area, and we didn't know the area well enough, and we tried to run it in Berkeley, and it should have been in San Francisco, or anyway, lots of retrospectives and debugging what went wrong there. We just didn't know the area well enough, but that cost us certainly tens, maybe hundreds of thousands. And so if you're lucky, you get to make bigger and bigger mistakes. But those are not the failures, I don't think. I think the hardest time for me as a founder was just intensely connected to the team happiness and satisfaction. And there was an era in the 2014-ish, 2015, somewhere around there, where we just had the year from hell. We had some business challenges, which led to team challenges, which led to all kinds of stuff. And we actually had more than half of the team leave the company in one calendar year. We went into the year with 51 people and we lost 26 people during that year. And we hired 19. So we actually ended up not that much smaller than we started. And by September, it was feeling okay, right? Because we had a critical mass of new, excited people joining the team who didn't really care about the old guard and the people who'd left. But man, that first 8 months of the year was the hardest 8 months of my life. And it was partly because there were operational challenges caused by people leaving, especially in a services business when that makes clients unhappy and so forth. But what made it a failure, what made it more visceral, was just the reason. People were leaving the company, and they didn't see Distilled as being the place where they would get that next stage of their own success. That's a demon that I'm definitely going to keep running away from and try to avoid ever happening again.
Yeah. Okay. Let's call it a learning, not a failure. But
Sure.
yeah, the last question is about a hack, right? So you can, if there is something that works magic for you, or just a piece of conventional wisdom that we would love to be reminded of, anything that you come back to.
So I'm quite a strong believer that there aren't magic. There's no silver bullets. There's no magic thing that just unlocks everything you want. Everything takes longer than you think, and blah blah blah. All those things we've already talked about. The mindset shift that I've made this year that has most helped me personally as a founder is a quote that I now can't remember who said it, so somebody will have to Google it. But it was, "How you do one thing is how you do everything." And this is very similar to anybody who's played sports, and probably other things. You get your coaches will tell you you're going to play like you practice, right? If you mess around in practice, you can't just turn it on in the game, and you've got to play hard. You've got to practice hard in order to play hard. And it's a similar kind of concept. And I had a lot of reservations about setting myself personal goals outside of work, particularly around health, wellness, fitness, those kinds of areas, because I felt like dedicating that much mental energy and focus to things like working out would distract me from the company mission of, I'm in a phase of my life where I want to achieve the company goal, and I'm quite locked in. And actually the inverse is true. How you do one thing is how you do everything. You set some personal goals, it makes you more focused on all the goals in your life. It's the experience I've been living through this year.
That's a really cool one. I actually started to, I haven't read or heard that quote or anything like this, but I just kind of started doubling down on like everything else that I'm doing outside of work, like just trying to do it better. And yeah, that's what I realized. Like it doesn't take you away from your work.
It's
It
weird, isn't
doesn't.
it?
Yeah, it gives you kind of in a way, the more energy you're giving out, the more energy you're getting. It's kind of a
Gives you
weird
energy, gives you
dynamic.
resilience, gives you confidence, gives you a purpose as well, right?
Hmm.
There's a reason for doing all these things. So yeah. Anyway, maybe it's a cliche. Hopefully not. Hope it's useful to someone, but it's definitely been one of those little mindset shifts that I found helpful.
That's a great one. No, I'm pretty sure. Well, a lot of people will find it useful. So, thank you so much for sharing, and thanks so much for sharing this story. I mean, it's fascinating. As I told you, I came up with a bunch more questions, but I'm going to let you go this time. But maybe we can do it again. So yeah, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. It's been a really, really interesting conversation, and I appreciate the insightful questions.
I'm really glad you liked it. So thank you so much, and take care.